to Community First, Reimagining Partnerships, the September monthly meeting of Female Wave of Change Canada. I'm really excited to see you all here today and see such broad representation, not only from across Canada, but also internationally. It's really exciting to have a couple of other ambassadors join us on the line and to see a number of familiar faces and also a number of new ones. So welcome to you all. So this evening, through an interactive and engaging process, you're going to learn about Community First, what it is, and what it looks like in practice. You'll explore what it means and what we need to do to reimagine partnerships and humanitarian action. You'll better understand what true partnership means. You'll discover how working with indigenous and underserved communities requires a new style of leadership. And you'll take away from some gems of wisdom related to successfully co-creating and implementing projects based on community needs. As I mentioned, this evening is brought to you by Female Wave of Change Canada, and we are part of a global social movement that is now in almost 50 countries around the world. And for those of you who don't know me, I am Pam Thompson, and I'm the Ambassador for Canada and proud to be that. And I incorporated Female Wave of Change Canada in December of 2020. So we're definitely still in startup mode and welcoming new members. And one of the things about Female Wave of Change Canada is we believe that authentic feminine leadership holds the key of creating a better world, a more conscious, equitable, just, sustainable, and peaceful one. And when I speak about authentic feminine leadership, I mean things like qualities such as creativity, collaboration, inclusiveness, those C's and I words and different words that are usually associated with the feminine. That said, men as well as women can learn and have these qualities. And we really believe that it's really important for women to work alongside with men. And we in fact do have some men in our movement. That said, our focus is on women. And through leadership development programs, monthly meetings such as this, conferences, and also different types of initiatives and projects, we really want to strengthen authentic feminine leadership around Canada and ultimately around the globe. So it's my great pleasure this evening to introduce to you our featured guest. And for those of you who haven't been here before, every month we have a featured guest. And I have a conversation with them, then we open up, we have breakout rooms, and you have the opportunity to network and meet other women from different parts of the world and of Canada. So Rachel Kiddell-Monroe is our featured guest, and she's a lawyer, a humanitarian, and an advocate. As a thought leader on reimagining humanitarian health crisis response, Rachel promotes values of humanity, justice, and solidarity in all aspects of global health. Rachel founded SeeChange initiative in 2018. This Canadian charitable organization supports indigenous and other vulnerabilized communities globally to co-create innovative community-first solutions, including the Community First COVID-19 roadmap to organize, prepare, and respond to health crises. This initiative builds on Rachel's lifelong dedication to humanitarian work and speaking out against injustices. Witnessing the profound global inequity in access to medicines, Rachel became the founding president of Universities Allied for Essential Medicines. I don't think you ever sleep, Rachel. She recently served as director on MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières' highest governance platform, supporting calls to reimagine humanitarian action through decentralizing governance. Rachel has received several awards for her work, including the Women Y Foundation's Woman of Distinction Award 2020, was featured in the Canadian media in 2020 for her work. She also received Future of Good's 21 New Founders to Watch Award in 2020. She's written extensively, most recently for The Lancet, CBC North, and Medium. Rachel is known for her storytelling. She speaks frequently at international events where she weaves together stories from her 30 years of firsthand grassroots experiences to engage audiences. So we're looking forward to Rachel sharing some of those stories this evening. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Pam. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks everyone for joining.
So yes, let's kick it right off here. So Rachel, what made you switch from being on the board of directors of Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders for almost 30 years, and which is really considered the pinnacle of, people keep entering, so I'm getting distracted, which is really considered the pinnacle of humanitarian aid organizations, to starting a new nonprofit on your own?
Well, great question. And maybe before I start, I just want to say thank you for having me here, Pam. It's such a privilege to be on this call and to be introduced to Female Wave of here in Canada. I think it's such an amazing initiative, and I really, celebrate all these kind of initiatives that are bringing forward these sort of feminine values into our leadership at a time I think that the world is in such a state where these for a long time now, but especially now more than ever, are needed in order to really be able to move forward. And the reason I'm starting with that kind of general statement is because in all the crisis we see in the world today, whether we see COVID-19, we see the crisis of Black Lives Matter, we see the crisis of climate, all humanitarian assistance is also in a time of crisis. And this is why I'm really focusing on humanitarian aid as like one aspect of global health that really has suffered from these issues that we're dealing with today, particularly around issues such as structural racism, issues of colonialism, issues of inequity. And a lot of those, because of the way that the humanitarian system has been born and grown, are reflected inside the humanitarian system. So I'm putting that out as a very broad statement to kind of anchor a little bit some of the things that I'll talk about. And I'm happy to, as we go into the discussion, to see a little bit, well, what, to understand a bit more about humanitarian assistance and where it's been coming from. But, one of the reasons that I'm still part of MSF. I think one thing about Médecins Sans Frontières is once you're part of it, you never really leave it. It becomes part of your blood. It becomes part of the way that you see the world. And it's a bit, I always describe it a bit like a warm bath, because when you go into MSF, you know people. In the terms of, these are people who share a lot of your values, your desires, your passion, your will to change the world, your commitment to helping people who are suffering and wanting to alleviate suffering and restore dignity. And these very basic values really unite you. So a lot of my main friend group is inside MSF after 30 years of just most extraordinary people that I've met and worked with. So I can never really leave it. And I still sit on boards of directors with MSF. That said, why did I decide to start my own organization? There's personal reasons, there are environmental reasons, and then there are sort of some social justice reasons. So for the personal reasons, it's really that I came to a time in my life after 30 years of being in MSF, where I felt that I needed to be able to take the learnings that I had from living in countries all over the world and working with such a wide array of different people who shared their lives with me, who shared their experiences with me, who shared their wisdom with me. And I felt it was time to bring all those experiences together in an environment where I felt I could really truly honor and respect and move forward based on those realities and those that learning that I had received from people around the world. I think that the humanitarian system was born from a specific way of looking at the world. If we think of where it started with the Henri Dunant, who was on the battlefields of Solferino in the 1800s, who really started this idea of assistance and humanitarian assistance, and was, part of the forming of the Red Cross, and then how humanitarian assistance really grew from that concept of help, of helping others, of charity, of support, you know, and these are a lot of them very colonial roots which have come through in the system today. And more I've been hearing from communities is that we need a different way of doing it, a different approach. And in order to do that, we have to get out of the box. We have to get out of the usual way of doing and find a new space. So I decided to take the leap, not because I don't think MSF is doing an amazing job, but because I felt I needed to create a new space where we could start to look at things in a different way. We needed a space with smaller numbers of people, with communities much more in the center of the design, the strategy, the creation of a new way of looking at humanitarian assistance, which helps all of us to reimagine and to re-understand what that is. The environmental reasons, some of the ones that I mentioned right at the beginning, because of the issues of racism, because of structural racism in our society and in global health, in the area that I'm looking at in global health, we need to unlearn a lot of the ways that we do things, and we need to relearn. And we need to relearn with the people who are actually the ones who are supposed to benefit from humanitarian assistance. So, and this requires a whole rethinking of really challenging those colonial roots, and then also not just talking about it, but actually demonstrating how do we do that? How do we do it in a different way? What does that require? Who needs to be sitting at the table? And what's clear for me is it's not the same people at the table anymore. And then in terms of the social justice, for me, one of the keys to really being able to shift a paradigm, which is where I'm trying to go, in order to do it, we have to walk the talk. Often what we see in many environments, and I've witnessed in humanitarian assistance, is that from the outside, we see this great humanitarian endeavor, but there's got a little bit of this sort of white savior complex around it. But let's just leave for a moment that humanitarians is essentially seen to be good, seen to be a good thing. The reality is often that the pressure and the drive to try to bring change and to work in some of the world's most difficult circumstances can actually start to create a lot of toxicity inside the system itself. A lot of competition, a lot of drive for resources, a lot of, you know, flag planting, who's going to be there first, a lot of these things, so that often that what you see from the outside is not what's reflected on the inside. So I've suffered, you know, a lot of people suffer a lot from that, a lot of burnout, a lot of people not being able to just survive inside the system. People not being able to get in because they're not part of the in-group, the in-crowd, the inequities inside it as well. So how do we start to really open this out and create a different way of working in this environment that doesn't require people to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, that doesn't require these unnatural demands and also sort of points of pride. Oh, you know, when I was in the field, I worked 19 hours a day and, you know, 7. This is not a way to work or to be. So how I wanted to also see, is it possible, and I know it is possible, that how do we create a different work environment that really allows people who want to contribute their commitment and skill and love and care, how can they do that in a way that allows that to be sustainable, and then really truly then to create that sense of solidarity and humanity.
Thank you. Yeah, you've opened up a lot of thoughts for me. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Rachel, but did you have something to finish there? Yes, it's interesting because you're talking about paradigm shifting, and that's certainly one of the things we're on about in Female Wave of Change as well, as we want to change the way the systems and the organizations are built because they're no longer sustainable. They're not working anymore. They lead to burnout, very similar to what happens in international and global health. Having worked in that area as well, I totally know all about this, working 12 to 15, 19 hours a day in the field. It's crazy mad. And also younger people trying to get into the system. It's very challenging, very, very hard for people to break into doing humanitarian aid and global health sort of issues. So thank you for sharing, you know, your broad scope there and the reason why you're doing what you do. So can you tell us a bit more about SeeChange? Because
Mm.
that to me is really fascinating, and how you started it with the Inuit in the Canadian North, and you know what it is basically and how it's working.
Mm.
That's a big question, but
That's a big question.
just
And
the
yeah,
essential elements of it, I would say.
yeah. So, you know, while I was finishing my sort of the last sort of tenure that I did on the International Board of Directors of MSF, I was looking around, and, you know, Canada is a country that's been really good for me. You can hear from my accent, I'm not from Canada. I've been here for like 15 years or so. I'm British, but my family's here, and it's a country that I've really grown to love despite the winter. And in Montreal, that's a thing. And not so much for the lucky ones living in Victoria with a wonderful microclimate, but those of us in Winnipeg and Calgary, yeah, we understand winter. And for me, I didn't grow up with that, so I find that very difficult. But it's been an incredible country. And I thought, you know, I want to be able to give something back to this country. I've always worked very internationally and globally. What could I do in Canada? And I sort of gently was looking around, but everything seemed to be covered. Amazing Canadian organizations working on Canadian issues, covering a lot of the major concerns and inequities and trouble, until I heard about tuberculosis. So tuberculosis, airborne disease, and often what we consider to be a sort of Victorian disease that kind of, you know, this was consumption, it used to be called, kind of thing we read about in books of Dickens and Jane Austen and all this kind of thing. It's not something we associate with Canada in 2018. Yet Canada, in its north, especially in Nunavut and all the other parts of the Inuit Nunangat, have some of the highest rates of TB in Canada. So an Inuit person today is 300, that's 300 times more likely to contract tuberculosis than any Canadian-born non-Indigenous person. And when you really stop and think about that, I just couldn't. I thought I kept thinking I was reading the figures wrong. It must be the wrong country. They must be talking about India, or they must be talking about Malawi or South Africa. They kept coming, but no, this is Canada. This is Canada, one of the richest countries in the world, you know, who has got an incredible health system that we all benefit from. Yet there are people in this nation who are dying from tuberculosis. And one of the real sort of flashpoints for that was actually a teenager who died in Nunavut in 2017 called Eileen. And she was 14 years old and she died from tuberculosis. Tuberculosis, and the kind of tuberculosis that exists in the Canadian North, is not difficult to treat. We have the drugs, we have the money, we have the medical staff, we have the nurses, we have the policies, we have everything we need. So why are people dying of TB today? So that was when I heard that, I was like, that's where I want to start to do. So I started to work with an Inuit-led organization based in a wonderful community called Clyde River, which is on Baffin Island, so on the far east coast of Nunavut. And with them, we started to create community-led workshops which could really be anchored inside the community, inside the culture, in the language of the community, to help them to unpack the history of tuberculosis and to be able to see how to go forward. Because what we realized after we did a sort of a review of a couple of communities in Nunavut was that the approach was extremely top down and the community wasn't engaged. In fact, the word tuberculosis means nothing to them. But even more than that, there's a huge trauma associated with tuberculosis. We've been hearing about residential schools and the horrific finding of the graves and everything recently. There's another story about the Inuit and other indigenous peoples, but largely Inuit people, who were taken out forcibly from their communities in the 1950s and 60s and forced into sanatorium in the south, which were extremely similar to the residential school structure, the whole ethos behind how those were being run. And many people were never seen again. Never seen again. There were children who were taken out of their families. There were young girls who were just removed on their own. It was, you know, a family would come, the families would be called to a ship. They would go onto the ship, they would be tested. if they were positive, they had to stay on. They were not allowed to go back onto the shore to get their possessions. They were not allowed to go back onto the shore to say goodbye to their family. And that was often the last time that the families ever saw that relative. Some of them were adopted out, some of the people died. And then some of the ones who did return back to their communities were no longer able to speak Inuktitut because they were not allowed to speak their own language in the sanatorium. Some of them were no longer able to adapt to the food and to the ways of living because they were never given their own traditional food or allowed to speak about the way that they lived at home. So you see a lot of those parallels. And that has been really a big fuel for the crisis, along with the incredibly poor social and economic conditions of Inuit people, the types of houses that they're living in. They used to be roaming on the land. They were put into communities, as we know them today, the 35 communities of Nunavut, which were very strategic, which were much to do with, you know, the South being able to extract and mine and protect the North. And so the people were used in order to fulfill the colonial government's agenda in the North. And when they were put in those communities, then the housing and the social structures around them were very poor and not well thought through. So that's how that project was started.
I think it's really interesting, Rachel, that you share the history related to sanitariums and TB and how the Inuit were put into them and sent south, because that story I don't think is well known by many Canadians. And it's another story of our history that we're obviously not proud of, but very, good for you to unearth that and see that and want to do something about it as a starting point. So tell us about Community First, because that's really sort of a tagline in my understanding. That's a methodology you've developed. And so tell us a little bit about that, what it is, and why did you use that term instead of community-driven, community-based, community-centered, which we typically use for this kind of work with community?
Well, I really credit that to the community in Clyde River, because they were the ones who really taught me in their gentle, wonderful way what it meant for a community to truly lead something. And I realized that a lot of the projects that I had seen done in organizations, humanitarian organizations or community organizations in the past talked about being community driven and community based, but the actual role of the community was somewhat peripheral. And what do I mean by that? It meant that to be community based meant that the community had been consulted with. So what does it mean to consult a community? Often that means a survey, or it means someone who looks like me walking into a community and asking questions. All of these things which create a power imbalance and perpetuate power imbalances, and also don't necessarily acknowledge the trauma and the history behind the situation in a community. So what we were trying to do, and what the community was telling us on that, is we need to do it in a radically different way. A radically different way, which means that you understand the roots of colonization, that you understand what racism truly means, that you understand what systemic racism has done to communities, understand the reality of what those the impacts that it's had on the community's health and social sense of well-being, health and well-being, and then start to be able to work from that to find solutions. Solutions that come from the outside or from the top down are not the ones that are going to be sustainable and stick. They're also not going to be the ones that are owned by the community. And we know that, if I want something, I need to own that process and be part of it and feel that it's sort of around me. So that's why the community first, we decided to really use a different term, because it is actually, substantively different from some of the other approaches around. All of that, not to say that we're the only ones doing it. And I think that's another interesting, when you look at indigenous communities and you look at truly community-based organizations who are really embedded and connected and have the trust of the community, they're all working in very community-first ways, where the community is leading whatever the process is that they're doing in the health. Yet in many organizations that come from a different perspective that are not embedded in, we'll be talking about doing community-based research, for instance, if it's an academic institution. If it's a humanitarian organization, it's all about community-centered approaches. But when you really look at them in detail, you don't really see all of that, all of those different parts to make the approach actually something that's sustainable.
So I'm going to throw this out to the audience here. Based on what Rachel's talked about, community first and her work, how do you see using this idea of community first in your work? Anybody got an idea? And it can be your work with an organization, with a community, as you do as a consultant, whatever it is. Does anybody have a thought on that? How they would see using community first in their work? This idea of really coming from an approach of listening to the folks that you're working with and having them shape how decisions are made and what happens. Or maybe somebody has an experience of a project they've been part of before that they want to share. Anyone?
I'll raise my hand.
Sherry,
So,
great.
for a number of years, I was the senior advocacy advisor for the representative for children and youth. And we did a great deal of work with indigenous organizations across the province, and with a particular focus on ensuring that indigenous youth who were in care or intersecting with the Ministry of Children and Families had a really clear understanding of what their rights were and what the obligations to care for them properly were from the ministry. And unfortunately, regularly, those obligations were not met. One of the things that we did consistently when we were going out to community was we reached out to community, asked permission if we could come to the community and were there needs that they could identify. And then we would partner with a community partner who led the engagement. We didn't go in as experts to teach them stuff they didn't know. We went in as people who had a toolkit, and they may already have some of those tools, but if they didn't have a full toolkit or they wanted to poke through ours to see if there were any tools they wanted to borrow, we were there to share. And as a general rule, we didn't go into a community unless they had identified a partner who would ultimately be our guide and our lead and our liaison and all of those good things, because we could go in with the best laid plans, and I can tell you without a single exception, things never went the way that we thought they would go. We had laid out a lovely agenda, 1, 2, 3, 4 in our heads, but often the community wanted to start at 3 or 7. So that was a learning experience coming from I worked for MCFD before I went to RCY, very different approaches. But I would agree with one of the things that you said, Rachel, is that ultimately it's about building community capacity. Communities know what they need, and they don't need people who know more coming in to show what they know.
Definitely so.
My experience anyway.
Thanks very much, Carrie. That was really helpful to hear something that you've been involved with and to share your perspective on it. Alexandra, Alex, I guess you like to be called.
Rachel, what you're doing is music to my ears. I just want to say that. You know, we talk about colonialism and how it's creeped into everything, and it's also creeped into our research methodologies, right? And one of the, I had a wonderful opportunity in doing my master's in social work degree to explore the whole concept of educational equity and also to learn about alternative methods of research. And one of the pieces that we learned about was something called participatory action research. And really that's all about the researcher, the researched becoming their own researchers. And I'm surprised because that was quite a while ago. You know, I really think the world needed to be hit over the head. And to your point earlier about just the insidiousness, if you will, of how much that idea of I know best and I'm here to research you has become unconscious. I mean, you know, it's systemic, unconscious, the way to do things, you know, that kind of thing. And I'm thrilled to hear, and I really get the thrust of the idea of the community first. And what we were looking at is the school where I was would admitted a lot of indigenous folks, but then just kind of left them to flounder on their own. So the school was kind of like, yeah, we've done a job here. We've opened it up, right? And then, you know, so I had, you know, shoulder classmates who came from all over Canada and Northern Canada and different indigenous folks who, you know, were brought into a system that they were totally unfamiliar with. And so I just want to say that I'm, you know, I applaud the work that you're doing. And yeah, I think now I'm not so surprised that we're not doing this because it took a global pandemic. It took, you know, the, you know, Me Too, systemic racism, you know, it took those cataclysmic occurrences, events to increase folks' awareness. And so, you know, I hope, and what's nice about what you've said and being here this evening is it gets me thinking again about how can I work in I work in organizational change work, and how can I work in a less colonial-like way, if you will. So thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comments. And just to add, I think that, you know, there are some really interesting indigenous-led research methodologies. So like two-eyed seeing is one of them, and the two-spoon methodology is another one. And there's a really interesting one from New Zealand. So I recommend that you have a look at those. And I can afterwards I can get you the link because I don't want to butcher the name of it. We kind of call it HPW, but it's something much more profound and meaningful than the acronym allows. And I think, you know, also and I think going to what was talked about by the previous speaker, Kerry, you know, it's wonderful to hear that. And I think that there are so many wonderful examples like that. It's just not consistent. It's not consistently done as an approach. And so, you know, I'm trying now to look really at like health crisis response. This really came response to TB. We've also done a huge response on COVID-19 using this same approach. And now not only with the Inuit in Nunavut, but also with indigenous communities throughout Central America, throughout Eastern Africa, and now just starting in West Africa, and now also in, you know, sort of Colombia and more in southern South America and in the Horn of South America, because there's such a call for that, and to have some kind of unifying approach, especially in humanitarian crisis response, because in crisis it's always a question of time. We don't have the time to talk to anyone. We just need to act, parachute in. I mean, I've done it. You know, parachute in, we've got the answer, set up this tent, set up this hospital here, health center here, you know, and then no one remembers to talk to the community about what they want. The Ebola crisis was a classic example. Well, Médecins Sans Frontières, it was amazing how quickly MSF was the one to call the alarm and talk about what was happening. It was not until a month, 6 weeks in that someone said, you know, these things are it's just not working. We're just not able to bring the rates down. People are still dying from Ebola. This shouldn't be. If it was going the way it should be, it wouldn't be happening. And then we started talking to the communities, and we had anthropologists, and we had local leaders come in, and they started saying, well, you know, if you do this like this, we can't do that. This goes against our culture. People are scared. You know, can you imagine what it's like seeing someone coming in with a visor and the yellow bodysuit and then taking their kids off into a tent that they can't see, and then they just never, no one ever comes out of that tent. Can you imagine what that's doing to people? So of course they don't want to come to your Ebola treatment center. You know, if we'd done that upstream, how many lives could have been saved, and how much of that pain and suffering could have been prevented? And I think on COVID, there's many parallels.
Thanks, Rachel. We have one more person, so we'll take one more response to that question about how do you see using community first in your work, or how have you used it in the past, or something similar. So Pernilla, do you want to share?
Well, thank you. I just want to share a small thing. I was active in a very small NGO, active in Humla in Nepal, one of the most remotest areas of Nepal, high up in the Himalayas. And it really gave me an eye-opener to speak to the community there when we had an interpreter, because when I was there visiting the villages, and one of the men, he told me that before Westerners came, we thought we were rich. We had everything we needed. We had lived in this lifestyle along the caravan routes in the Himalayas for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And then there were white trekkers, and they said, oh, you don't have schools. Oh, you don't have a hospital. There's no electricity, and look at your kitchens. So different NGOs came in, running small projects, and left, and no one could repair what they had left. So it was really a shock. And it made us, this is a very small NGO, so luckily in one way we didn't have much money or funding, but we took a step back and listened, what is it you want to do? So but it was really shocking. And we also invited him to come to Stockholm, and he gave a talk in one of the museums in Stockholm. And I think it's totally unintentional, but the director of the museum introduced him and said, he talked to the audience because he was going to give a speech, and he talked to the audience, this director, and he said, oh, Humla is a region that was discovered in 1959 by this and this person. And our guest from Humla, he whispered to me and said, no, it's not correct. We were in Humla long before 1959. So this colonial is kind of soaked into our culture, that the first Westerner was the one to discover Humla, but they had lived there for thousands of years. Sorry, I won't interrupt, but yeah, it's so important to let the community decide what is it they want us to help with, because it's not only our perspective.
Thanks, Pernilla. Did you have anything to add, Rachel, or should we move on to the next question?
No, that's fine. I think that Pernilla's statements are absolutely
it's really interesting what people's experiences, right? That reinforce what you've been saying. So how has your work with Community First influenced your perspective on leadership, Rachel?
Oh, leadership, that loaded term. It has made me question leadership completely, actually, and really made me wonder what is leadership? Where does leadership come from? And are the sort of the values around leadership that we seem to cherish so much really viable, and really where we should be going? So I can sort of try and break that out a little bit, because I think there are some myths around leadership, and maybe I'll use those as a way to explain. So leadership is individual. The term leadership often implies an individual is somewhere sitting on the top of a pile and is somehow leading all these things to happen. Working with communities has really challenged that concept. So I'll give a really nice example from a community we're working with in Honduras called Retoca. And this is a 12,000 person strong indigenous community of Lenca. And one of the people from the Indigenous Leadership Committee approached us and said, you know, we really like the roadmap that you do that would help to empower us to respond in emergency crisis. You know, can you come and tell us how it works, and we can see if that's useful for us or not. So we explained how it worked and we got to the end of it, and then the group of women that were there was saying, oh, okay, so we're not sure if this is going to work with the current kind of governance that we have, because we have this Lenka committee, but it's got people in it. Some of them don't believe that COVID is a thing, and then other people believe that COVID is a thing. So we are going to create the organized women of Retoka, and we are going to lead the response. And so then I was like, okay, great. So who is going to be sort of in charge of that? And they looked at me and they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, you know, it'd be good to have one person, a point person who's maybe leading the initiative. And they said, no, we'll all lead the initiative. And so this was 20 women, and they led in whatever way and however way they managed. But I was talking to different people all the time. It never mattered. It was like a seamless transition between them all. I could tell Gisela something one day, Maya something the next day, Teresa something the next day. They all communicated and they led this incredible response where they distributed masks, disinfectant, did education in schools, and they covered about 75% of the community and find their own ways to do it. So it really challenged this idea of, why does leadership need to sit inside one person? We have this very command and control approach to leadership, and that really changed it. So that was one myth that was busted for me. The other one is that leadership is binary. You know, leadership is often there's a male leading or there's a woman leading. We talk a lot about female leadership, and we talk a lot about, you know, white male leadership especially, and deriding it. But it's not a binary thing. Leadership is not just, and it's an intersectional issue as well, leadership. So it's not just about being male and female. It's, are you black, white? Do you identify as BIPOC, indigenous? Are you are you transgender? Are you gay? Are you lesbian? You know, any of the range of those things. Those intersectional issues that go around race, sexual orientation, gender, etc., religious beliefs, culture, values, etc. This is all around in leadership. So leadership is not a binary thing. And that really sort of challenged also my views and my sort of expectations of leadership. And the third myth, and there are lots more, but these were sort of the ones that really came to top of mind, is that leadership denotes power. And I think as we're talking about communities and shifting a paradigm and shifting a way of doing it, we have to think about power and what kind of power that we hold as being in leadership positions, and what impact that has on people who are these beneficiaries or recipients of aid in the context that I'm working in. And how, if we're really going to talk about community first, how do we shift that power in a completely different way and put it back where it belongs, which is in the community? And that requires us to step out of the way, to step out of our privilege, to step out of our the barriers that we put up, and to allow that space to be filled by the people who should have the power. So leadership, challenging, more likely I would talk about catalysts.
I found that very fascinating, the three myths that you used. And the myths about leadership implies an individual, leadership is binary, woman or man, or leadership denotes power. I think that word power is so key. And it's, how do we define power? Because I think I personally, and I've been in groups of women where we've had a discussion around power and there's a lot of discomfort in the room. So I think when you frame it, sometimes it's helpful to frame it with in terms of power with rather than power over. Because you need the power to change, but if you do it collaboratively with a group, it's power with. But if it's power over, it's like that one guy at the top or that one woman at the top. So I think we need more conversations about power and leadership, and you've raised some really excellent issues here about this and help clarify it, certainly for me and hopefully for others, Rachel. So thank you for that. So at Female Wave of Change Canada, as I've mentioned to you before, some of you may know, some of you may not, we plan to create projects and implement them with partners in our 5 pillar areas. and there are education, environment, economy, health, and humanity. In fact, there's a working group right now, a project team that's working on an environmental project. It's quite exciting. I won't say anything right now, but what words of wisdom, Rachel, would you have to share with us related to developing and maintaining partnerships with indigenous and other underserved communities in any of those areas?
Well, I can only talk from my personal experience because I wouldn't want to impose on others, because my first would be listen. I learned to listen and to understand what listening deeply is, how to listen behind the words or the silence. The next thing I learned is that I need to do my homework, that I need to learn my history and unlearn the history that I learned and relearn a real history, which means I need to seek out indigenous authors, indigenous academics, indigenous leaders, indigenous stories, and indigenous historians. Find those stories and actively search for that telling of history. And then I need to, and also in culture, in terms of the stories, the books that I read. And then I need to listen again. And then now I can listen maybe even a little bit more deeply. Maybe my ears are even a little bit more open, and maybe I have learned something from what I've been reading that I can actually, when someone from an Inuit community or a Lenca community or a Guatemalan community speaks to me, I hear it now a little bit different because I've educated myself in a different way. And then after that, I need to take time and allow space in conversations. I like to talk. I can talk a lot. I can talk very fast. I can, take the space. But how to be comfortable with silence in a conversation, how to just let that silence be, and how to just be present in the moment. That's something that I've learned. And then I need to listen again. And then one of the things that I've learned to do is adopt this approach of appreciative inquiry, which is a thing. Appreciative inquiry is really focusing on the strengths of the person that's in front of you, the community that's in front of you. And how do you look at strengths-based approaches? So rather than seeing communities in need, you see communities with strengths who are able to deal with whatever they're facing. But often what's happened with the colonial approach has been those strengths have been so eroded, and that they don't see them as strengths anymore, that they forget that they have those strengths. So in those strengths, we're talking about the people, the culture, the knowledge of the language, traditional knowledge, knowledge of the land, knowledge of the history, the stories, the intergenerational stories. These are all incredible assets of the community that they can, and strengths of the community that they can use when they need to respond to a health crisis. And then after asking the right sorts of questions, then I need to listen again. And every time I'm stopping to listen, I'm hearing more, and I'm listening more deeply, and I'm understanding more. And the words that someone is saying, that from the first time that I spoke to someone and heard them, to then this time that I'm hearing them, has completely changed my outlook. And then nothing without the community or for the community, only with the community. Everything has to be with, co-created, co-designed, done with humility, with respect, with honor, and taking on those cultural and ensuring that those cultural values are reflected in, without me having to become that culture, but just to recognize that there are things that I do not understand and that I will never understand, but the community can and does, and they have that wisdom that they need to bring in. And then this really important part of reflecting, and then going back to the beginning and listening again and doing your homework, and then the cycle repeats. So it's a constant learning. And if you really, that is my words of wisdom, is never stop learning, never stop hearing, and never stop needing to listen.
Thank you. And I think with this group, I think most of us really want to keep learning. That's why we're part of why we're here, right? Making a difference and constantly learning. So thanks for that. That was a very detailed response. And I'm sure many of us, I was writing down all the ideas here. And just to read something in the chat, Charmaine Hammond said, I love the concept of stories and the power that they have and the impact they can make. I like how you remind us about the importance of listening. Beautifully said, Rachel. Listening, hearing more equals hearing more. Love that. So yeah, I think that's a really good place to almost finish our discussion here, Rachel. Before, you had mentioned before 2 references, and so Jan Mills had said, can you please share them? So what I'll commit to doing is Rachel will send them to me, and I'll send them out to anybody who has signed up for tonight, and also our members, so that you will have those, the 2 spoons and the 2-eyed seeing, I think it was. That would be great. So if people want to learn more about you, Rachel, and your work, what's the best way to do that?
Well, we have a SeeChange website. You're very welcome to go on there, and that's really focusing on the story of SeeChange and the work that we're doing in Nunavut. We have a LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all under SeeChange Initiative. And then I also do a lot of posting on my own LinkedIn as well. And I have a blog that people are welcome to go in, where I do some sort of reflections on leadership and trying and starting a startup. So you're welcome to go there. I mean, we can also share that with people if they're interested. I could put the links into the chat if you like.
Well, thank you so much, Rachel. I'd like to just thank you on behalf of the board and Female Wave of Change and all the folks here tonight for that really enlightening and rich discussion. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everybody here did too. And best of luck with your work. It's really amazing, and it's so important. It's just so important, and the timing is so right, I think, for this, you know. And also the questions about leadership, they're very relevant and very timely. So thank you for all that thinking that you do, and also the work that you actually do on the ground. Wonderful having you this evening. So Rachel's going to stay on here, and what we're going to do now is we're going to go into a breakout. And before we do that, Barb's going to set us up. But before we do that, I need to find people's, here we go. Why am I not getting this? Barb.
I'm going to have to go, so just so Barb doesn't.
Sure.
Okay. The numbers will change. Thank you so much, everyone. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks,
Just a
Marie,
second.
for being here.
I'm going to make you the host, Barb, in a minute here. So I've done that, but let me explain what we're going to do here. So we're going to break into groups of 3, and each person is going to have an opportunity to share a little bit about themselves and their name, so you get to know the other folks in their group, and then you're going to be able to be asked to answer 2 questions. They are, what new ideas or understandings did you gain this evening from our featured guest? Michelle, do you mind typing these in for us into the chat? What new ideas or understandings did you gain this evening from our guest? And how do you see applying what you've learned today in your work and in your life? How do you see what you've learned today, applying this in either your life and or your work? Now, you each have 3 minutes. You get about 10 minutes each in the group. And what I'd like you to do is, the person with the longest hair can start and choose a timekeeper. So one person time, 3 minutes. Excuse me. So there's about 1 minute leeway, basically. You each have 3 minutes to answer those questions. And then I'd also like you at the outset to choose someone to take notes, so that when we come back to the group, we'll share some key takeaways from the small groups. Everybody clear on this? Does anybody have any questions before Bart puts us into small groups? 3 minutes each. Person with the longest hair goes first. Choose a note taker. And the 2 questions: what new ideas or understandings did you gain from our featured guests, and how do you see it applying what you've learned today in your work and in your life? Okay, Barb.
Okay. Going to open all the rooms, and away we go.
Hi there, Carrie. Hi there,
Hi, Pamela.
I hope I'm pronouncing your name, Sharon. Is it Sharon or Sharon? It's Sharon. I thought it was. It's been a while, so I just wanted to make sure I was pronouncing it properly. Okay,
Thank you.
so we're all together. So the person with the longest hair.
I guess that
Carrie, you get
probably me.
Carrie, yeah.
to, who wants to be the note taker and turn to and share if you wish to the larger group? Anybody?
I'm not very reliable as a note
Okay,
taker.
I'll do the notes. I don't mind.
Sharon, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I should be the timekeeper. I'm going to just go and get my phone here. Okay, here we go. I purposely put it in the other room because I don't normally like to look at it, but I should have it here now. Okay, so I will do the timing. So the questions are, is everybody clear? The first one is, what new ideas or understandings did you gain this evening from our featured guest, and how do you see applying what you learned today? So I will start, but first of all, you can introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself and what you do. So Carrie, go for it.
Thank you. I'm Carrie Gallant and I'm in Vancouver. And much like our speaker, I'm actually a former lawyer, but I don't do that anymore. That definitely has informed a lot of my route to where I've gotten to, which has been a circuitous path through conflict resolution. And I can really resonate with a lot that Rachel has shared with us tonight. And there's a lot that we can take from what she's doing and what she's been doing with Médecins Sans Frontières, as well as the other groups, in terms of how we look at our conversations. And that's really the area that I play in a lot with my clients. And as Pamela knows, I'm just in the middle of a book launch on that topic, on conversation secrets for tomorrow's leaders. And so I love that Rachel picked up on listening and questions, because to me, those are the two first foundations. And they actually, both of them appear as one of the 21 secrets in the book. I mean, we call them obvious secrets because the leaders don't use enough, because they're so obvious that most of us have known them or trained in them, and we forget. And many of us don't actually know that they are as powerful as they are. And so what I see in, with I'm so connected with what Rachel's talking about, that when we're looking to community first, it is about, it's not about dissolving the self. It's not about taking the self out of the equation, but rather than the self being the first thing that we get into when we're trying to just resolve an issue or come together, is to look at what's up for you. Like going to the community and seeing the community. I don't think I heard her use this kind of language, but seeing the community as its own organism. Like we live in systems, and each of us individually can get things done. And yet, just like this book, I have not written a book on my own. It actually took doing it in collaboration with two others. And that's where it started for me. I felt like it was really thriving. And so, it's like we're not getting through COVID alone. We're getting through COVID together. And when we see the fissures in communities around, say, for example, that issue, I think it's because we're not seeing, we may be reacting individually and not seeing how our communities are connected to other communities.
Carrie, there's just,
go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes here, and you were talking about what Rachel had said, and you said listening and I didn't get the second one.
Questions.
Asking
questions.
Yeah.
Did you? Sorry, go ahead, Carrie.
I was just going to say, like we can use questions as a weapon. Like being a lawyer, sure. We know how to use. I'm forgetting my words now. the sort of the leading questions, right? Because we want to lead to an answer. The most powerful questions often, are the open questions where we're expressing curiosity and we're gaining information, we're gaining knowledge, we're gaining understanding that we wouldn't have had if we didn't step into that curious place, which is really that empathy thing about being curious about another person, being curious about a group of people. I love what I think it was Rachel who said this about how going into a community and not going in saying you have the answers. I mean, that's how we got into this mess with First Nations communities, right? Is because our ancestors, our white European ancestors arrived and said, hey, we know what this land needs. We know what is going to happen with this. And we saw, I just realized I live right next to the endowment lands, to the forest out on the west side at UBC. And I didn't know this because I'm not from Vancouver originally. And I've been walking in this forest for years. And my husband's just recently become a student of study, not a real student, but he's been studying some of the local history in Southlands and discovered that Bill Vander Zalm gave this forest to Metro Parks.
That's right.
Just gave it, unseated, and just gave it to the parks. So we did it again, like within the last 25 years, we did it again. We did it again to my neighbors. We're down the road.
Yeah, I'm gonna call time.
Sorry,
Sharon. No. You've raised some really good points. Sharon, do you want to share a bit about yourself and what you do and your answers to those two questions?
So I live in Winnipeg. I am an immigrant, as you can hear. I was born in South Africa and came to Canada in 2003, and I've been in Winnipeg almost 11 years now. I've recently been working as a holistic practitioner, and of course, COVID threw that out the window as with lots of other people. And you know, when it started, I knew I was going to have to pivot, but I'm still waiting because I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing now. I just don't see myself going forward teaching virtually. I don't see myself treating people with distance. So maybe this is the end of that road for me. And this is one of the reasons, Pam, why I joined this evening. I'm looking for answers, and I so loved everything that Rachel had to say. Her thing about listen, learn, respect. This is something that is people have never done this. You know, how can we learn from you before we tell you what you need? You know, it's just, I just think it's just so beautiful and so. I mean, I was born in South Africa. I lived through apartheid. I know exactly, well, not exactly, but I can feel this whole thing happening all over again, you know? So it's, and maybe my history has to help me on this road. I don't know, but I'm open and receptive.
Did you have something else to share besides in terms of how do you see applying what you've learned today in your work or your life?
Well, I honestly, I can't get this listen, learn, respect out of my head. I just think it is so important, so important.
It is. And you can feel your passion around it, Sharon. So you maybe want to, just meditate or reflect on those words and think, what path could I take that would help me to do this work? You know? Because you have, and having lived through apartheid, that's like an amazing experience, right? I mean, you know, we can read about it, we can hear people speak about it, but it's not the same as actually being there and having experienced it, you know?
Sharon, can I make a recommendation to you?
Right.
Have you heard of the book Emotional Agility?
No.
Okay, it's written by a woman named Susan David, who is South African, and she lives in the United States. I just recently heard her tell a couple of horrific stories about growing up in South Africa and being confronted with certain aspects of the violence that she and her other people. So she's white, and so she was also herself in dangerous situations, and as a white woman. And she also talks about, obviously growing up in South Africa amongst Black people as well, how anyway, I think you might find some interesting things.
What's the
there
last name? Susan
David.
David. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And she's got a very, she's also the lead. She also runs a couple of coaching organizations, one of the largest in the States. So she's very, very highly respected as a researcher. She's a great writer. She writes on LinkedIn and she's on Instagram too. So she's out there a lot. She might be very interesting to connect with her writing. I just offer that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Carrie. Okay, well, I guess we're going to leave really quickly here. I guess I'll just say, how do I see applying what I've learned today, or what the new understandings? I've done a lot of work in international health and development, and I've always led, being a Canadian, with asking groups what they need. And so, for me, that's not something new, but the new pieces on leadership, that, the new looking at leadership and breaking those myths, they really gave me pause to think. And so that was kind of new information for me, because I know, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing female wave of change work, is that we need to change paradigms. And so anyway, so that to me was interesting. So wonderful to meet you both, and hope to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam.
Take care. Bye.
Okay, everybody back almost. I think everybody's back. All right. Okay. I'd just like to give everyone an opportunity to share some of the insights that they may have received within their group, and maybe just if one person could speak for the group you're in, some of the things that came up and some of the things you learned from Rachel, or things that really, some takeaways perhaps. Would anyone like to share what they learned in their group?
I can go first. It's always hard to be the first, right? So I'll kick it off.
You go, Christina.
You set the bar.
So I had the pleasure of meeting Shannon McGavin and Patty Washington. Those two lovelies were in my breakout, and we had a great discussion. And one of the things, Shannon herself is starting a youth wellness organization. Again, kudos, that's amazing. And she was saying that it helped her I hope I'm phrasing this correctly. It's always, the telephone game, right? Where's the disconnect? But anyway, she said that the approach would help her rethink. And so originally she's like, it's always about the youth and working directly to the youth, and not necessarily with the parents, and maybe taking that step back and just reversing that and looking at it from a community holistic approach, and engaging the parents first and foremost, or more holistically than perhaps she had originally thought. So from a professional standpoint, that really hit home for Shannon. And I think for Patty, and like myself on the personal front, it's like, how can we bring forward some of these things in our everyday lives, right? And really just taking a step back and looking at, on a personal front, how can I help my friend, rather than just being, oh, what do you want? Just really asking them, how can I enable you? How can we help you? And how can I be of service? Or better yet, just be there in silence and be with that person, and to the point, be comfortable with silence is what I took away.
Love that.
Right?
Yeah.
Just being comfortable with silence. And I think in a leadership position, we're often not necessarily embrace that. It's always about talk, right? And talking at or talking to, right? And so for myself included, I guess embracing the silence is something that I think I need to do a better job at as well. And then the one thing from my side was also loved the story about the women being able to, the leadership, and having 20 women lead, and it's just not one person. That just, okay, I need to take that back and rethink my approach at the leadership table with my organizations and challenge how things are done, because that is just a brilliant, lovely way of doing things, if I may say. So I think I talked enough.
Thank you. Okay, beautiful. So again, yes, that leadership is not necessarily individual, and it's a beautiful thing when the whole community is involved. That's the essence of community first. Beautiful. Anyone else like to share what came up in their group? Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sure. Good.
So exactly, Christina, talking about more than one leader in a group, that really hit home with Pam Thompson. She found that extremely helpful, and also said she was going to review that. I was in a group with Carrie Gallant and Pam, and Carrie was talking about how do we look at our conversations. She loved the listening and questioning. I just absolutely love the listen, learn, and respect. Those three words really hit home for me. And this is something that I'm really going to work on and think about. I just love that. And again, as Christina mentioned, more than one leader. And what went through my head, as Christina was saying, was, very often you get somebody who has great abilities, but for some reason they don't want to put themselves forward. So you have this group and you have this leader, and he or she is telling everybody how they need to do it and what they need to do. But there's this little mouse at the back who's probably got the best idea of all. And so she's not bringing it forward because we've got one leader, right? So I just see that as expanding into a force of energy that who knows where it's going to go, because this is, Carrie also talked about how the COVID is where did I get through that? We're getting through COVID together. And so COVID is teaching us all new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things. And I think many, many people, including myself, have had to rethink our whole viewpoint on where we're going and what we're doing with our lives and our businesses and whatever it is that we do in the world. So yeah, this is I'm just so bubbly and so excited.
I can see that, sure. Well, thank you for sharing. And in a word, I'd say unlearning. You're right. New ways of thinking and unlearning previous things that we know weren't serving us or the community. That
right.
The people know best with themselves versus the leader knows best. Okay, great. Anybody else like to offer any insights or something that you gained? No.
I'd like to, if I could
make a comment. Sure.
Speak for our little group. Donna Fairhurst, I thought she brought up a really good point. She's an accountant, and just part of her learning was to facilitate more with her clients, but that paradigm of they're paying me to know, they're paying me to be the expert. So how do I do that in a different way? So I just thought that was very insightful. I really appreciated her saying that. And Donna talking about her work with a leprosy colony and having to really listen hard to their language, but not just their physical language, their emotional language. And again, really deepening and reinforcing this whole concept of listening, which she seems to do with her coaching practice already, but just Rachel's list was just embedding that information even more. And for me, I came back from Toronto after 2 weeks of reflection and travel and seeing family and friends and weddings, coming back feeling like, what do I emphasize in my business going forward, and do one thing rather than 4 things? And Rachel's list just reinforced completely the concept of me doing custom work and co-creating my glass butterfly pendants and deepening that process with the goddess of fire, Pele, and embedding all of the information, the feelings, emotions, color choices, and making that a really spirit symbol in co-creating art with women. And I really want to do that more than I want to get in the studio and create my own art with the Goddess of Fire, Pele. I came back and this has just opened and completely centered me. This is what I'm doing, and this is all I'm doing. And thank you, Rachel, because you just helped me get very, very clear.
Beautiful focus. Beautiful. When we listen deeply, and as you said, and bring in collaboration with the input from the community, whether it's our clients, whether it's other sources, listen deeply, unlearn, make space for the silence. And no, and it's interesting. I like the point about the expert. You know, we think we're being paid to be the expert, but what if we let them be the experts first? You know, again, first, listen first, and then, okay, I hear you say this. Here's maybe how I could support that. So it's kind of just, you know, could be just letting them speak first. Okay, Pam, how are we doing? Do we have time for more shares, or you're muted, Pam? Or do we need to move on?
We might be able to have one share if someone's got a burning to share really tightly.
One more?
And then we need to move
Okay.
forward after that.
Well, I can reiterate. I did jump into one of the groups with Pernilla and Carolyn, and again, it seems to be a theme that deep listening, unlearning not just ways of doing things, but unlearning history that we may have taken on that was not necessarily the true way of things. And also, again, the power of stories and allowing people to tell those stories, not thinking that our stories are more important or are the right ones, and the space for silence. So I think that really, those are what I think we're going to take away, not just in our work, Rachel, but in our lives. You know, deep listening, share your stories, and make space for everybody. So thank you. Over to you, Pam.
Thanks, everybody. Now it's time for Christina, our Director of Marketing, of Communications and Public Relations, is going to share a little bit about Female Wave of Change Canada, how you can become a member and the benefits of membership.
Absolutely. So here we go. Do you all see my screen okay? Today, technology was not my friend, so henceforth why I was asking. So it's amazing to see so many new faces and familiar ones. The more I have been with Female Wave of Change now, Pam, for what, 3 or 4 months, 5 months, as I said earlier in my
break. 3 or 4
break.
months. I know I'm losing track too.
I know time is I'm losing it, but it's been an amazing adventure to just get to know everyone and have these meetings. And I feel this guilty pleasure. I'm almost sitting back and listening to all of our speakers and come forward and share with us some amazing stories. And that's really what a Female Wave of Change Canada is. Today's meeting is a perfect example of what we can do and what we can bring and how we can really about an organization we're all to our own communities. And so it doesn't we need more voices to share our their knowledge and also help lead some of the changes that we're looking to make. So there we have 5 core areas, pillars or pods as we like to call them, where we really are trying to make a difference. Economy, education, environment, humanity, and health and wellness. And those are really the pillars or the underpinnings of what we're trying to do in terms of changing the community. And so what is it, what do you get to do? What does it mean to be part of Female Wave of Change Canada? Well, we're looking for experts, we're looking for insights, we're looking for leads who can share with us their expertise, their insights, and really get out in the community and bring more amazing speakers and guests to join us, and so we can learn. At the end of the day, it's about unlearning and as well as learning, right? So very quickly, For those of you who are not members and are interested, please take a second to go to our website. I'll give you our website in a few minutes and learn more about who we are and what we're trying to do. And you can get a sense of what the membership includes and what you're able to really hopefully get satisfaction out of, and also being part of something that we really are trying to do. So you can go to Female Wave of Change Canada, so FWOCcanada.com, and you can get more information there. And I really hope to see more of you in our next meeting. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Christina. First of all, I'd like to thank again Rachel for spending this time with us and sharing your wisdom and your wonderful stories. Really, thank you so much. And thank you all for showing up tonight and participating so actively and sharing your thoughts and your stories. So hope to see you again soon. That said, our next meeting is October 20th at 4:30 p.m. Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. We always have our monthly meetings the third Wednesday of every month. And our guest next month is Anne-Marie Schroeder, and she's a diversity and inclusion specialist and also international best-selling author of Being Brown in a Black and White World. So we're going to have a very interesting discussion on exploring inclusive leadership. So hope you can join us for that. We also have a couple of other things coming up. I'm excited to share, and I'm going to put it in the box here, the chat box, the link to the global conference. The Female Wave of Change Global Conference is coming up September 24th and 25th. And no, I sent it to the wrong person. Sorry about that. It has to go to everyone. Okay, here we go. And there's the link. I put it in the box. This conference is Waves of Change Around the World. So if you go on the main Female Wave of Change global site, you will see the whole program. And it's quite amazing because many of the countries that are part of Female Wave of Change are sharing, and the maximum amount of time that we have is 30 minutes. And it starts actually at midnight Pacific time, the 24th. So when you go on the site, you'll see it's on Central European time. There's all sorts of amazing keynotes, presentations. There'll be entertainment. There's always drummers and dancers from different parts of the world. It's quite amazing. And Female Wave of Change Canada will be showing up at 7:30 a.m. on the 25th, which is that specific. So 10:30, it's a little bit more palatable, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on the 25th. And I'm excited to say that Charmaine Hammond, who's here tonight and is one of our Female Wave of Change Canada members, she'll be sharing a video clip of a documentary film that she has been executive producer of, and it's been in the works for 5 years. And so I'll be there as well. And also several of our board members, Barb and Michelle, and we're going to have a presentation. We're going to talk about how the work that Charmaine and her group is doing in the documentary is all about links with Female Wave of Change Canada, and also a bit more about it. So what I'd like to do, I'm going to open up for a minute and ask Charmaine to share a little bit. It's going to be an interactive discussion. We'll kick it off and Charmaine will share a number of things about the partners and who's involved. But Charmaine, do you just want to give a few pieces here so people can?
Sure. It's an animated movie called Back Home Again. And we have our worldwide premiere actually coming up in 3 weeks at the Edmonton International Film Festival. So we're super excited. It has an all-star voice cast, which is incredible, including Michael J. Fox and Catherine O'Hara and Kim Basinger and Tantu Cardinal and Lauren Cardinal. So just an incredibly diverse cast. There's 19 of them. The majority of them are Canadian. And the movie is a conversation starter about mental health, resilience, and community. So it really fits with the conversations we've been having tonight. It's based on the Fort McMurray wildfires that happened in 2016. And the story is told through the eyes of the animals who live in the forest. And so it's a family movie. It was created not to be a children plunk your kids down in front of the TV type movie. It was created to be a family movie to inspire conversations around healing and connection.
Thanks, Charmaine. Yes, it's very exciting. And the other piece is, my understanding is you're developing support materials.
We are.
That will complement the video. So there'll be an opportunity for people to access this video from different parts of the world and utilize it in their families, in their classrooms, in their communities. So it's quite exciting, and as a very, what should I say, something that can be used. I'm at a loss for words. That rarely happens, but used in many venues and situations.
Yes. And now in other languages, because we had a sponsor come forward to cover the cost of us translating it into Cree and Dene, and which is really exciting. So that will be the indigenous languages will launch in probably November, and we're hoping to have Tantu and Lauren join us maybe at an event. But it's an incredible, beautiful story, and really, I think will help people through these conversations around mental health that the world is, dealing with right now.
Thanks so much, Charmaine. That's really exciting. I didn't know the latest about the translation. That's awesome. Yeah. So yes, hopefully some of you will be able to join us. And the other thing is, we have our initial AGM for members to participate in, and that is the September 29th from 4:30 to 5:30. We're trying to make it short. PM Pacific, so that'll be 7:30 to 8:30 Eastern, and it's going to be typical to an AGM. We're also going to have an election of officers, and we'll also have space for people to share some ideas with us, because we're a very collaborative organization. So if you have ideas you want to share, future topics, featured guests, that kind of thing, we've got some questions in mind. So come join us. It's our first one, and we'd love to have you. So anyway, on that note, thanks again, and hope to see you on October the 20th. Take good care, everyone. Bye-bye.